The private dining room at the Gotham Club in downtown Manhattan fell into a sudden, expectant quiet, broken only by the sharp, metallic clinking of glassware and the muffled laughter of 6 senior executives. 32-year-old Lucy Bradson stood over him, holding the empty crystal flute upside down, her eyes bright with victory and contempt. She had just been named Chief Executive Officer of Apex Vanguard, the regional logistics powerhouse, and she wanted everyone in the room to know precisely where the power rested. Derek did not blink. He did not wipe his face with the linen napkin sitting beside his untouched plate, nor did he flinch when the icy liquid seeped into his shirt. Instead, he looked up slowly, meeting her gaze with an even, unbothered expression that caused the smile on her face to falter for half a second. "Are you sure you want everyone to remember tonight this way?" Derek asked. His voice was low, devoid of anger or humiliation, carrying a calm authority that seemed entirely out of place for a man who had spent the last 4 years working as a mid-level operational auditor in the basement offices of the company. Lucy laughed, a loud, artificial sound designed to regain control of the room, and set the empty glass down on the mahogany table with a hard snap. She leaned in close, ensuring the rest of the board members could hear her words clearly. "I want them to remember that the era of deadweight is over, Derek. You were hired as a favor, you stayed because nobody noticed you, and tomorrow morning, your access badge will be deactivated." If this story is holding your attention, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from today. The room erupted into quiet chuckles, with several vice presidents nodding in agreement, eager to curry favor with their new corporate leader. Nobody in that high-end Manhattan venue knew the full truth about the quiet single father who took the subway home every evening to his 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, in a modest Brooklyn apartment. They saw a man who wore worn leather shoes, drove an 8-year-old sedan, and kept his head down during quarterly reviews. What they failed to realize was that Apex Vanguard was not an independent entity. It was a subsidiary acquired 6 years earlier by a private wealth master trust known as the Mercer Sterling Foundation, an entity valued at $20 billion that held absolute controlling equity over 90% of the commercial real estate and logistics networks in the Eastern region. Derek Mercer was not just an auditor. He was the sole surviving beneficiary and trustee of the Mercer Sterling Foundation, created by his late father, Standard Oil heir Arthur Mercer. When Derek's wife passed away from illness 4 years ago, he stepped back from public life, placing his global holdings into asset management trusts run by his lifelong attorney, Vance Sterling. Derek chose to work from the bottom inside Apex Vanguard under an assumed middle name, wanting to understand the real operational health of the company without the distortion that accompanied extreme wealth. He wanted to raise Chloe in a grounded environment while quietly auditing the executive suite to ensure the company treated its thousands of warehouse workers fairly. Over the past 2 years, Derek watched Lucy Bradson manipulate her way up the corporate ladder. She was charismatic, ruthless, and highly adept at taking credit for operational restructures designed by regional plant managers. Whenever a project succeeded under Derek's quiet oversight, Lucy presented the metrics to the board as her personal achievements. Derek allowed it, observing her behavior closely while documenting systematic discrepancies in the executive expenditure accounts. He wanted to see how far her ambition would drive her before taking formal action. That night at the Gotham Club was supposed to be the culmination of her long campaign to secure the chief executive position, but her arrogance had finally outpaced her judgment. When Derek stood up from the table, he did not rush toward the exit. He adjusted his damp suit jacket with deliberate care, picked up his briefcase, and looked around the table at the faces of the men and women he had evaluated over the past 48 months. He saw Vice President of Finance Thomas Reed, who had actively helped Lucy alter quarterly overhead reports to mask declining margins. He saw Chief Operating Officer Mark Vance, who had repeatedly ignored worker safety complaints in the Pennsylvania distribution hubs to inflate short-term profits. None of them met his eyes for long. Their gaze shifted back to Lucy, who was already signaling the waiter for another bottle of champagne. Derek walked out of the Gotham Club and into the crisp autumn air of Fifth Avenue. He pulled out his phone and made a single call to Vance Sterling, senior partner at Sterling & Cross, the legal firm managing the $20 billion trust. "Vance, it's Derek," he said, stepping into the back seat of a waiting Blacktown car that had been trailing him discreetly for 3 blocks. "Execute the board oversight protocol for Apex Vanguard immediately. Convene a full governance review at the corporate headquarters on Wall Street tomorrow morning at 8. I want all emergency executive contracts frozen pending audit validation." On the other end of the line, Vance sighed quietly, understanding that the long period of Derek's covert observation had officially come to an end. Inside the Gotham Club, Lucy Bradson was pouring another round of drinks, entirely unaware of the administrative machine that had just been set in motion. She believed she had secured her ultimate victory. The board had signed her 5-year executive contract earlier that afternoon, promising a base salary of $3 million alongside substantial equity options. However, her contract contained a standard clause required by the parent company's legal framework. All executive appointments remained provisional until formal validation by the ultimate controlling shareholder within 72 hours of board approval. Lucy had viewed this clause as a mere formality, assuming the mysterious parent foundation was an inactive holding account managed by anonymous bankers in Switzerland who never interfered with regional operations. She spent the remainder of the evening celebrating with her core inner circle, boasting about her plans to streamline the workforce by laying off 15% of the ground staff across 4 states to boost immediate dividend payouts. She openly joked about Derek, calling him a relic of an old, inefficient system that needed to be purged. In her mind, humiliating Derek in front of the board served a strategic purpose. It signaled to every employee in the company that sentimentality was dead and that absolute compliance was now required. She had no idea that Derek's personal auditor accounts had already captured every illegal transfer she had made to third-party consulting firms over the previous 18 months. Derek arrived home to his Brooklyn apartment at 9 that evening. His daughter, Chloe, was sitting at the kitchen table finishing her 4th-grade math homework under the watchful eye of Mrs. Gable, their longtime nanny and neighbor. Derek kissed his daughter on the forehead, washed the remaining smell of spilled champagne from his hair, and sat down at his home desk. He opened a secure, encrypted terminal connected directly to the central clearing ledger of the Mercer Sterling Foundation. Within 30 minutes, he extracted the detailed banking records showing that Lucy had funneled $4.2 million into a shell company registered in Delaware, controlled by her brother, under the guise of strategy consulting services. This financial manipulation was the exact mechanism Lucy used to artificially lower operational costs on paper, making her appear to be an operational genius to the board of directors. Without these fraudulent deductions, Apex Vanguard was actually operating at a net loss in 2 major sectors due to her poor logistics management decisions. Derek had gathered this evidence slowly, waiting until she officially signed her provisional agreement so that her legal liability would be absolute under federal corporate governance laws. He printed the final transaction logs, filed them into a leather binder, and closed his laptop just as the clock struck midnight. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the financial district. At 7:30, Lucy Bradson arrived at the 60-story glass tower on Wall Street that housed the executive offices of Apex Vanguard. She walked through the marble lobby wearing a custom-tailored white suit, nodding arrogantly at the security guards and administrative staff. She took the private elevator straight to the top floor, expecting to find her new office ready and her personal secretary waiting with her morning coffee. Instead, when the elevator doors opened onto the executive suite, she found the floor unusually crowded with senior legal counsel and external forensic accountants. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with Team Derek. Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. In the center of the main boardroom sat Vance Sterling, flanked by 4 senior corporate litigation attorneys from Sterling and Cross. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the New York harbor, was Derek Mercer, dressed in a flawless navy bespoke suit, wearing a platinum watch that cost more than Lucy's annual base salary as a vice president. Lucy stopped in her tracks, her hand tightening around her designer leather briefcase. She looked between Vance, Sterling, and Derek, her confusion quickly turning into visible anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, stepping into the room. "Derek, I told you last night that your employment was terminated. Security should have revoked your keycard at midnight. Why are you in the executive boardroom?" Vance Sterling stood up, opening a thick leather folder on the conference table. "Ms. Bradson, you are currently addressing the sole trustee and principal owner of the Mercer Sterling Foundation, which holds 94% of the voting equity in Apex Vanguard. Mr. Mercer is not an employee here. He is the ultimate controlling authority of this entire enterprise, including this building, the subsidiary networks, and the executive contracts." Lucy stared at Vance, a nervous laugh escaping her lips as she looked around the room for support from the board members who were slowly filing into the space behind her. None of them spoke. Their eyes were fixed on the heavy legal documentation spread across the table. "This is ridiculous," Lucy said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to project confidence. "He is an auditor. He has worked in the basement accounting department for 4 years. He earns $80,000 a year. This is some kind of desperate stunt because I fired him last night." Derek turned away from the window and walked slowly toward the head of the boardroom table. His posture was completely composed, his tone measured and direct. "I accepted a line-level audit position 4 years ago to observe how this company functioned from the inside, Lucy. I wanted to see if the leadership cared about the stability of the organization or merely their own personal bonuses. You proved beyond any doubt that you view this business as nothing more than a vehicle for self-aggrandizement." Derek gestured toward Vance Sterling, who immediately handed a copy of the forensic financial report to each member of the board of directors who had entered the room. "Over the past 18 months, Derek continued, you systematically transferred $4.2 million to Apex Strategic Partners, LLC, an entity registered in Wilmington, Delaware. That entity lists your brother, Richard Bradson, as its sole managing director. No actual consulting services were ever rendered. Those funds were rerouted back into private accounts to subsidize your personal investments while you cut safety budgets for our logistics workers in the field." Lucy's face turned completely pale as the vice presidents around her began frantically flipping through the pages of the report. The financial documents contained clear, unassailable evidence of wire transfers, contract signatures, and bank routing numbers linking her directly to the Delaware accounts. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. The very board members who had laughed alongside Lucy at the Gotham Club the previous evening now pulled their chairs back, visibly distancing themselves from her as they realized the full legal catastrophe unfolding in front of them. "The provisional contract you signed yesterday afternoon," Vance Sterling stated calmly, "contained an explicit clause requiring ultimate shareholder validation. As trustee, Mr. Mercer has officially rejected your appointment as Chief Executive Officer. Furthermore, under Article 4 of the corporate bylaws, all executive indemnifications are voided in cases involving documented fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Lucy looked at Thomas Reed, the Vice President of Finance who had helped her approve those invoices. "Thomas, say something," she pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "You reviewed those reports. You signed off on those accounts." Thomas Reed looked down at the table, refusing to make eye contact with her. He knew that if he attempted to defend her now, he would be included in the immediate criminal referral that was clearly being prepared by the legal team sitting across the table. "I relied on the documentation provided by your office, Lucy," Reed said quickly, attempting to save his own career. "I had no knowledge of any undisclosed personal relationships with vendors." Lucy realized in that single moment that every ally she believed she had cultivated over her years at the company had abandoned her the instant real power asserted itself. Derek stood at the head of the table, looking down at Lucy with the same quiet observation he had displayed at the restaurant the night before. "You believe that power came from titles, loud declarations, and public cruelty," Derek said softly. "You thought that by pouring champagne over my head, you were proving your superiority in front of people who only respected you because of the authority you claimed to hold. But real authority does not require noise or cruelty. It requires integrity, patience, and responsibility." Derek nodded to two men standing near the boardroom door, who stepped forward immediately. They were private investigators accompanied by representatives from the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, whom Vance Sterling had contacted early that morning. "Ms. Bradson," the lead investigator said, stepping toward her, "we have a warrant for the seizure of your electronic devices and financial records in connection with an ongoing federal investigation into corporate wire fraud." Lucy dropped her briefcase onto the floor, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she looked at Derek, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or mercy. She found none. Derek's expression remained completely neutral, a reflection of a man who had made his decision long before entering the room. "Your access to this building is revoked, Lucy," Derek said, his voice entirely steady. "Your personal belongings from your previous office will be packed and delivered to your home address by courier. You will not be permitted back on the premises." As the federal agents escorted Lucy out of the executive suite, the board members sat in complete silence, terrified of what Derek's next move would be. Derek turned his attention back to the remaining executives seated around the table. He did not raise his voice, nor did he display any satisfaction in the sudden collapse of the woman who had tried to destroy his career. "Effective immediately," Derek announced, "the board of directors is dissolved pending a complete structural audit. Vice President Reed, your resignation will be accepted by noon today, or you will face the same legal proceedings currently initiated against Ms. Bradson. The operational management of Apex Vanguard will return to its founding charter, prioritizing worker safety, fair compensation, and absolute financial transparency." Over the following weeks, news of the corporate restructuring at Apex Vanguard swept through the financial community. Lucy Bradson was formally indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and grand larceny, her legal defense liquidating her personal savings just to pay for representation. The story of her public humiliation of a line-level auditor who turned out to be the hidden billionaire owner of the enterprise became a cautionary tale throughout Wall Street. Meanwhile, Derek Mercer returned to his work, stepping into the CEO role temporarily only long enough to appoint an ethical management team before returning his full focus to raising his daughter. Chickens came home to roost for everyone who had participated in the toxic culture of the executive suite. The warehouse employees across the regional hubs received immediate pay increases and upgraded safety equipment, paid for by the recovery of misappropriated corporate funds. Derek continued to live modestly, teaching his daughter Chloe that true strength lies in humility and self-control, and that those who use power to diminish others inevitably destroy themselves in the end. If you enjoyed this incredible story of patience and justice, don't forget to give this video a like, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every week.